Six Flags. America is gone. A $1 billion empire just collapsed, and nobody saw it coming. Gates locked, rides silent, families stunned. This wasn't a ride malfunction or a storm. It was years of debt, deferred maintenance, and boardroom decisions finally catching up. Attendance had been slipping, safety shortcuts mounting, marketing gimmicks failing. And the fallout? Thousands of jobs gone, local businesses hit, and an industry-wide wake-up call. Watch till the end, because what happened here could happen anywhere, and the cracks you're about to see are already spreading to other theme parks. The day the empire fell. No one believed it at first. A billion-dollar empire gone in a single morning. Screens lit up with breaking headlines, each one louder than the last. Six Flags. America shuts down. Effective immediately. Cameras caught stunned families, turning away from locked gates, confused workers clutching their uniforms, and entire parking lots sitting empty under the midday sun. For decades, this place had been summer's heartbeat. The laughter, the smell of asphalt and popcorn, the flash of roller coasters against blue sky. It was America's promise of escape. Now, it was a ghost town before lunchtime. Security guards stood by silent turnstiles. Food carts sat half-stocked, sodas still cold, tickets half-printed on frozen machines. Corporate statements called it a necessary restructuring, but nobody outside the boardroom used those words. What they saw looked like collapse abrupt, total, and personal. The shock didn't come from a ride malfunction or weather emergency. It came from the realization that something this big, this beloved, could just stop existing. The billion-dollar question echoed through every news feed and diner conversation that day. How does an empire built on joy die overnight? How do rides that thrilled millions become relics before the day ends? But every sudden disaster has a long fuse, and this one had been burning quietly for years, behind the lights, behind the laughter, and inside the books that no one wanted to read. From celebration to collapse. Once, it was unstoppable. Six Flags. America stood as the pride of the Mid-Atlantic, a monument of motion, sound, and summer spectacle. When it opened its gates each spring, the region came alive. Families packed highways before sunrise. Radio stations ran contests for free passes. Every year, attendance records were broken, and expansions rolled out with the confidence of a giant that thought it would never stumble. But the same ambition that built the empire planted the seeds of its fall. The expansions came faster, the debts climbed higher, and the repairs took longer. Behind the curtain of fireworks and festivals, maintenance teams struggled to keep aging rides alive. Paint covered rust, slogans covered losses. Every new attraction came with another loan, another promise to investors that next season would fix it all. By the early 2020s, the cracks were no longer hidden. Attendance slipped, safety budgets shrank, and regular visitors began noticing the difference. The empty food stands, the faded signs, the rides temporarily closed for maintenance that never reopened. Yet the illusion held right up until the day it couldn't. The same energy that once filled the park with life turned into silence overnight. And that silence revealed something deeper. This wasn't just a bad quarter or a management blunder. It was the end of a story America thought it knew by heart. The warning lights had been flashing for years, but inside the company, the story sounded very different, because the real collapse started in rooms far from the rides themselves. If you've made it this far, you care about the truth behind the headlines. Hit like, subscribe for more hard facts, and share your thoughts below, because this channel runs on real voices, not corporate press releases. Behind the curtain. Inside the operation, pressure built quietly. Rising material costs, soaring insurance premiums, and deferred maintenance created a chain reaction. Every patch became a placeholder. Every temporary fix postponed a reckoning. The once bright attractions became liabilities. Paint hid corrosion. Budgets hid debt. Insiders later admitted that safety inspections were rushed, that crucial equipment was good enough for one more season. Behind the curtain, management wrestled with impossible math. The cost of modernization grew faster than attendance revenue. Each year, more of the profit went to servicing debt instead of upgrading rides or training staff. When public enthusiasm waned, marketing departments tried to compensate with discounts and gimmicks. But discount tickets couldn't mask exhaustion. There was also the pressure from the top, the demand to appear vibrant, no matter the cost. Executives pushed for public optimism. Family fun remained strong. One internal memo declared, even as maintenance teams fought to keep aging machinery alive, employees learned to smile through worry. To visitors, the park still looked cheerful, but behind the scenes, entire departments shrank. Crews who once replaced bolts and bearings now salvaged old parts to keep things moving. It was survival disguised as showmanship. And yet, from the outside, few noticed. The lights still turned on. The laughter still looped through the speakers. The illusion of normalcy held until the day the books no longer balanced. While the paint still shone, the bolts underneath told another story, one that would end with a locked gate and unpaid bills. When the gates locked. The final day came without fireworks or farewell speeches. Employees arrived expecting another long shift, and instead found security at the entrances. Management handed out sealed envelopes and polite instructions, effective immediately. The Ferris wheel stood still, the midway silent. Only the flags overhead moved, snapping in a cold breeze that smelled faintly of oil and dust. Some workers lingered long after the notice was read. Maintenance crews walked the grounds one last time, touching the steel rails they had repaired for decades. Vendors packed up equipment with shaking hands. For them, this wasn't just a workplace. It was a life rhythm ending mid-beat. A few visitors who hadn't heard the news arrived that afternoon, only to find barricades blocking the main lot. They pressed against the gates, taking photos like tourists at a monument of loss. The news vans came next, their cameras sweeping over the deserted park. Anchors called it the biggest theme park shutdown in modern American history, citing debts exceeding $1 billion, attendance drops in the double digits, and rising costs that no promotion could offset. Analysts speculated about mergers, mismanagement, and economic headwinds. But for the people who had built their lives around this place, none of those terms mattered. The reality was simpler. The laughter was gone, the jobs were gone, and the park that had defined summers for generations was over. By sunset, the gates were locked, the lights shut off, and the rides stood silhouetted against a fading sky. The echo of what once was lingered in the air, heavy and unreal. But emotions don't close billion-dollar books. Inside the boardroom, behind the smiling mascots and cheerful marketing campaigns, another world existed, one built on spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and quiet panic. In those upper-floor meetings, words like optimization and strategic realignment replaced any mention of fun or community. The memos that later surfaced told a clear story. 6 flags. America was no longer a strategic fit within long-term portfolio objectives. In plain language, it meant the park was too costly to save and too small to justify. Executives studied attendance graphs with red lines that dipped lower each season. They spoke of asset efficiency, debt leverage, and capital recovery, but not of workers or families. It was business logic, stripped of sentiment. Meetings stretched late into the night. Executives debating whether to sell off land, merge assets, or quietly shut operations. The tone was sterile, precise, and void of emotion. One insider described the final decision as surgical, a cold, calculated removal meant to protect the brand's balance sheet. They called it an adjustment, not a loss. Yet the irony was clear. The same culture that once sold joy now measured success by elimination. The boardroom didn't collapse overnight. It simply detached from the ground it was built upon. The language of strategy had replaced the language of survival, and soon the numbers began to expose the truth that words could no longer hide. Debt and doubt. The numbers told a brutal story. Over the past decade, the park's debt ballooned to hundreds of millions, fueled by expansion loans and refinancing deals that made sense only in years of high attendance. When visitors stopped coming, those same loans turned toxic. By 2024, interest payments alone consumed nearly half of annual revenue. Maintenance schedules were cut, staffing reduced, and updates postponed indefinitely. Inside financial filings, executives insisted the challenges were temporary. They cited seasonal patterns, regional weather disruptions, and market realignment. But behind those phrases was a simpler truth. People were no longer buying tickets fast enough to pay the bills. Industry analysts noted that attendance had fallen by nearly 20% in just 3 seasons. In human terms, that meant hundreds of thousands fewer families walking through the gates each year. Each dip in attendance forced more desperate accounting. To show short-term profit, executives deferred maintenance and sold future advertising rights. One source described it as borrowing from tomorrow to survive today. Shareholders were told the brand was well-positioned for the future, yet internal forecasts warned of a deficit impossible to recover from without major restructuring. Debt doesn't just weaken balance sheets, it warps decisions. Every ride repair, every payroll check, every marketing push was filtered through the question, can we afford this quarter? Doubt replaced vision, and in that doubt, the foundation began to crumble. What followed wasn't a financial rescue. It was a trade, one where history and heritage were exchanged for the promise of short-term gain. Land over legacy. When companies run out of ideas, they turn to their land. Real estate becomes the last card to play. Six Flags. America sat on hundreds of acres of valuable property, perfectly located between major metropolitan corridors. To accountants, it wasn't a park, it was an asset waiting to be monetized. Consultants began visiting the site, not to assess rides, but to survey terrain, drainage, and development potential. Conversations shifted from maintenance budgets to zoning codes. Internal reports described divestment opportunities and land use optimization. Those phrases meant something simple. The ground beneath the park was worth more than the park itself. Investors quietly approached city officials about redevelopment plans, retail centers, housing projects, logistics hubs. The numbers were undeniable. The land's appraised value approached $300 million, nearly triple what the park could generate in profit over 10 years. In this equation, legacy was expendable. Nostalgia didn't appear on balance sheets, and the laughter of past summers couldn't pay interest. When the final decision came, it was packaged in the sterile language of corporate transition. Official statements mentioned new growth opportunities, while omitting the human story left behind. This wasn't the first time an entertainment landmark had been dismantled for property value, but it was one of the largest and most symbolic. An era was ending, not through disaster or scandal, but through arithmetic. And as the bulldozers waited on standby, another kind of tremor spread across the industry, because one closure rarely stays alone. Domino effect. The fall of one park sent ripples across the country. Competitors, investors, and regional attractions studied the collapse like a cautionary manual. Industry insiders warned that the same pressures, high maintenance costs, aging infrastructure, and post-pandemic attendance fatigue were squeezing other properties too. Analysts pointed out that at least 6 regional parks showed similar patterns: declining ticket sales, ballooning operational costs, and heavy debt exposure. Stockholders grew uneasy. News of the Six Flags America shutdown triggered a temporary drop in related entertainment shares, wiping out tens of millions in market value within a week. Even rival chains publicly expressed concern, releasing statements about stabilization initiatives and portfolio resilience. Behind closed doors, some executives feared that consumer habits had shifted permanently, leaving regional theme parks trapped in an outdated model. Journalists began drawing parallels to retail closures from years past, when sprawling malls, once filled with life, turned into hollow concrete shells. Economists called it experience shrinkage, the idea that people now seek entertainment through convenience rather than commitment. For the communities surrounding those parks, the conversation wasn't about market cycles or portfolio health. It was about jobs, identity, and pride. The loss of one amusement park might not crash an economy, but it leaves an empty space that spreadsheets can't fill. The domino effect wasn't just financial, it was cultural. The fall of one symbol reminded everyone that even the biggest institutions can forget why they exist. And when that happens, collapse becomes contagious. But the human cost was just starting to register, and the story that began in boardrooms was about to land on front porches, in local diners, and in the hearts of those who built their lives around what was supposed to last forever. Workers left behind. When the closure was announced, the first to feel its weight weren't investors or executives. They were the people who had kept the park alive day to day. The maintenance crews who arrived before dawn to test rides. The technicians who spent summers in the heat, tightening bolts, checking sensors, cleaning tracks, the seasonal staff who relied on those few months of work to pay rent or tuition. They all stood in shock as the news spread through group chats and break rooms. For many, it wasn't just a job. It was a ritual that had defined years of their lives. One longtime employee described the moment as a silence that felt heavier than noise. Another, a maintenance supervisor of over 20 years, said simply, "We built this place with our hands, and now they tell us it's over by email." Pride mixed with disbelief. Even those who saw the decline coming never imagined it would end so abruptly. Severance packages were limited, temporary workers got nothing, and the maintenance teams were told their contracts would end within days. Many stayed until the final hour, finishing tasks that no longer mattered, draining systems, covering machinery, locking tool sheds. It wasn't loyalty to management, it was loyalty to the craft, to the sense of purpose that work had once given them. When the last gate closed, they left quietly, carrying memories heavier than their toolboxes. The shock that hit the workforce soon rolled through the town beyond the gates, where every storefront had once depended on the crowds that no longer came. The town that thrived on thrills. For the nearby community, the park's shutdown wasn't just a headline, it was an earthquake. Entire local economies had formed around those summer seasons. The motels that filled up each weekend now sat half empty. The diners that once opened at dawn to serve park staff and families began closing early. One restaurant owner estimated that his revenue dropped by nearly 40% within 2 weeks of the announcement. The hardware store lost its largest maintenance account, and the local tax office projected a significant shortfall in annual revenue. In a town built on tourism, that loss wasn't abstract. It was daily life. Young employees who had counted on seasonal jobs found themselves searching for work that didn't exist. Parents debated whether to move closer to the cities. For some, the park had been more than an employer. It had been a symbol of identity. "You could tell what month it was by the sound of the roller coaster," said one local resident. "Now, it's just quiet." The ripple spread far beyond the town. Suppliers, drivers, and small businesses felt the strain as promises of redevelopment rang hollow. Locals had heard it all before, plans made elsewhere, benefits seldom returning home. In the end, the true cost wasn't financial. It lived quietly in memory and loss. Families and memories. Generations grew up under the park's bright banners. It was where first dates happened, where children faced their first big fears, where parents captured photos of milestones now stored in fading albums. For countless families, it wasn't just a place of rides, it was a marker of time. The smell of popcorn, the hum of machinery, the music looping through the speakers, all became part of personal history. When the gates closed, it felt like a piece of childhood had been erased from the map. Parents who once brought their kids now drove past the locked entrance, pointing out what used to be. Some stopped by the chain link fence, snapping one last picture before everything changed. Social media filled with old photos, grainy shots from the 1990s, staff badges, ticket stubs. The posts carried the same message. "I can't believe it's gone." There was sadness, but also reflection. People recalled the unity of shared anticipation. The park's real currency was connection, not rides. When that vanished, the loss felt cultural, not commercial. A new rival emerged quietly, glowing screens replacing laughter, pixels trading places with pulse, and virtual thrills outshining real memories. If you want more stories that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening behind closed gates, make sure you're subscribed. The next breakdown might hit closer to home than you think. Fun in freefall. The collapse of the park wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a shift happening across generations. Entertainment had changed. The era of physical escape, the noise, the motion, the shared thrill was giving way to digital comfort. Families found amusement at home, streaming rides in virtual reality instead of standing under the summer sun. Attendance numbers across the nation reflected it. People were choosing convenience over connection, safety over spontaneity. Sociologists called it the comfort turn, a cultural pivot from public adventure to private experience. Theme parks that once thrived on community energy were now competing with living room screens and endless scrolling. When the screens got brighter, one analyst wrote, the parks grew dim. The statement wasn't poetic exaggeration, it was demographic fact. Younger audiences had never built the same habits their parents once did. The result was a slow erosion, a steady fading of the places that once defined recreation. For those who remembered its golden years, the emptiness spoke volumes. Progress had brought amnesia, screens replaced shared laughter. The fall of Six Flags America was more than financial. It marked the loss of genuine experience and collective identity. The silent park stood as a monument to change, proof that every generation redefines joy, sometimes forgetting its builders. Yet every ending writes a new beginning, and beyond that quiet horizon, the industry faced its reckoning, deciding what fun would mean in the years ahead. Industry wake-up call. The collapse of Six Flags. America became the kind of event that other companies couldn't ignore. Within days, executives across the amusement industry called emergency meetings. Competitors issued carefully worded statements about restructuring strategies and sustainable park operations, while analysts used sharper terms, a long overdue reckoning. For years, the business model had depended on constant expansion. New rides, new loans, and ever higher attendance goals. Now, the blueprint itself was under fire. Industry observers predicted a pivot toward consolidation, fewer parks, but larger, more expensive ones. The era of small, regional attractions, once accessible to families from every background, was giving way to mega resorts, designed for travelers willing to spend thousands for an all-inclusive experience. The idea was simple: concentrate luxury where loyalty still exists. But that shift came with risk. It left vast regions of the country without local entertainment, hubs, hollowing out the sense of tradition that once tied communities together each summer. For insiders, the park's collapse was a mirror, not a mystery. Rising costs, aging rides, and changing habits echoed across the industry. Even giants grew cautious, cutting hours and delaying repairs. The laughter faded to whispers of caution, because beyond profits, a deeper conversation had begun about people, purpose, and permanence, policy, and labor crossroads. In the weeks following the shutdown, local councils, unions, and redevelopment agencies began circling the empty site. The land that once roared with laughter was now the center of political noise. State officials debated whether to preserve it as green space or convert it into a commercial zone. Labor unions, representing hundreds of displaced workers, demanded retraining programs and relocation support. Economists warned that without intervention, unemployment in the region could rise by more than 5% within a year. Behind closed doors, the discussion revealed a familiar divide: short-term economics versus long-term community. Developers argued that mixed-use housing and logistics centers would generate more reliable tax revenue. Local residents countered that those plans erased the town's identity. "We don't need another warehouse," one resident told reporters. "We need a reason for people to come here again." The statement resonated beyond local politics. It reflected the broader struggle of how modern economies treat heritage. Federal policymakers took notice, seeing the collapse as proof of fragile seasonal labor and over-reliance on leisure spending. Proposals for reform surfaced, then stalled amid politics and budgets. The shuttered park became a symbol where growth met memory, and as debates lingered, investors quietly reconsidered whether joy could ever be a stable business. Investors and public trust. Markets react faster than emotions. Within a week of the closure, tourism stocks slipped across the board. Investment analysts urged caution, advising clients to re-evaluate holdings in large-scale entertainment portfolios. What had once been seen as a stable, recession-proof industry was suddenly viewed as volatile. Even theme park bonds, traditionally low-risk instruments, were downgraded by major rating agencies. For investors, the lesson was immediate. Consumer joy no longer guaranteed profit. They began studying data on visitor frequency, travel trends, and discretionary income with new skepticism. Funds that had poured money into experience-driven sectors quietly shifted focus toward digital entertainment, hospitality technology, and short-term rental models. The shift wasn't emotional, it was mathematical. If people could access excitement from their living rooms, why bet on concrete and steel? Public trust fractured. Families questioned whether their memories were built on debt and illusion. Critics blamed greed, others called it progress. Beneath the figures, faith. Joy, as an endless business, crumbled. Happiness, once sold as certainty, proved fragile And when the illusion vanished, reflection replaced entertainment, demanding lessons over nostalgia. Legacy and lesson. Months later, the property still sat quiet. Grass grew through the cracks of forgotten pathways, and the faint outlines of rides cast shadows under the sun. What once symbolized motion had become stillness. Locals occasionally wandered by the fences, peering through to catch glimpses of their past lives. The sound of laughter had been replaced by wind moving through rusted rails. It wasn't just a landscape of loss, it was a lesson written in metal and silence. The park's downfall became a case study in decline. Analysts blamed mismanagement, others called it evolution, but the truth was simpler purpose eroded. Maintenance failed, leadership drifted, and profit replaced meaning. What began as joy ended in distance, from workers and community alike. Its empty grounds became a mirror for every builder of empires. Vision fades, arrogance grows, and silence remains to remind us. Every empire falls for the same reason. It forgets who it was built for. The collapse of Six Flags. America isn't just a business story, it's a reflection of how dreams fade when numbers replace purpose. What once echoed with laughter now stands silent, reminding us that joy can't be financed forever. The gates may be closed, but the lesson remains open. Even billion-dollar empires fall when they forget the people who built them. Stay tuned, stay curious, and remember what vanished here could vanish anywhere, unless we learn what this fall was trying to tell us.